All right. Often thought of a great equalizer, education is an important source of differences in political perspective. Governments use public education to try to teach all children a common set of civic values. It is mainly in schools that Americans acquire their basic beliefs in liberty, equality, and democracy. In history, classes, students are taught that the founders fought for the principle of liberty and studying such topics as the Constitution, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement. Students are taught the importance of equality. Research finds that education to be a strong predictor of tolerance for racial minorities. Through participation in class elections and student government, students are taught the virtues of democracy. These lessons are repeated in every grade and in many contexts. It is no wonder they constitute such an important element in Americans' beliefs. At the same time, differences in formal education are strongly associated with differences in political outlook. In particular, those who attend college are often exposed to modes of thought that will distinguish them from their friends and neighbors who do not pursue college diplomas. One of the major differences between college graduates and other Americans is that higher level of education are associated with greater involvement in politics. College graduates are more likely to vote, join campaigns, take part in protests, and generally make their voices heard. Political environment, the condition and events that exist when individuals and groups enter political life shape their political attitude and values. Although political beliefs are influenced by family background and group membership, the content and character of these views is, to a large extent, determined by political circumstances. For example, the baby boom generation that came of age in the 1960s was exposed both to the Vietnam War itself and also to widespread anti war protests, which has made that generation suspicious of foreign wars. The September 11 attacks in 2001 and the war on terrorism helped shape the political lives of those who came of age in the 1990s and 2000s, making them more concerned about security and safety. Political knowledge is important in shaping public opinion. Explore when and why public opinion changes and the role that political knowledge plays. What best explains whether citizens are generally consistent in their political views or inconsistent and open to the influence of others? In general, knowledgeable citizens are better able to evaluate new information and determine if it is relevant to and consistent with their beliefs and opinions. As a result, better informed individuals can recognize their political interests and act consistently to further those interests. But political knowledge is generally low in America. In one widely reported survey, 71% of Americans could not name their own member of Congress. This raises the question of how much political knowledge is necessary for one to act as an effective citizen. In an important study of political knowledge in the United States, the political scientists Michael X. Daly, Carpenny, and Scott Keeter found that the average American exhibits little knowledge to political institution processes, leaders, and policy debates. Those that does this ignorance of key political facts matter? Daly, Carpeny, and Keeter also found that political knowledge is not evenly distributed throughout the population. Those with higher education, income, and occupational status, and who are members of social or political organization are more likely to know about and be active in politics. An interest in politics reinforces an individual's senses of political efficacy, the belief that their actions and opinion matters, and provides an incentive to acquire additional knowledge and information about politics. As a result, individuals with higher income and education also have more knowledge and influence and thus are better able to get what they want from government. Shortcuts and cues. Because being politically informed requires a substantial investment of time and energy, most Americans seek to acquire political information and to make political decisions on the cheap, making use of shortcuts for political evaluation and decision making rather than engaging in a lengthy process of information gathering. Researchers have found that individuals rely on cues and information from party elites and the media to aid them in attitude information. Other inexpensive ways to become informed includes taking cues from trusted friends, relatives, colleagues, or religious leaders. By means of these informational shortcuts, average citizens can form political opinions that are, in most instances, consistent with their underlying preferences. Studies show that even individuals with low levels of political knowledge are able to make relatively informed political choices by relying on these voter cues. Scholars agree that people rely on shortcuts when forming their opinions on politics and public policies. The public the public's reliance on elite cues has taken a new significance in today's era of elite polarization. As the political parties and elected officials have become increasingly polarized, has this change affected the way that citizens arrive at their opinions? Political scientists James Druckmann, Eric Peterson, and Rune Slothoff have found stark evidence that polarized political environments fundamentally change how citizens make decisions and form opinions. Notably, polarization between the parties mean that party endorsement, such as of an issue or candidate, have a larger impact on public opinion formation than they used to. At the same time, polarization decreases the impact of other information on public opinions. That is, party polarization may actually reduce levels of political knowledge. Thus, elite polarization may have negative implications for public opinion formation. Skim and scan. Another factor affecting political knowledge is the form in which people consume information. The transformation of political information in the digital era has had a profound effect on the way the news is reported and how citizens obtain information about politics. In 2012, survey conducted by the Pew Internet and Americans Life Project found that 36% of social networking sites users say those sites are important for their political information, and more than 3 in 4 Americans read the news online or seek political information online. Recent research also indicated a trend in journalism towards shorter articles and flashier headlines. Americans today are likely to read the news by scanning and skimming multiple headlines online in bits and bytes rather than by reading long news articles. Nicole Carr's best-selling book, The Shallow: What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, detailed the decline in the deep processing that underpins mindful knowledge acquisition, inductive analysis, critical thinking, imagination, and reflection. He argues that although the internet may seem to be making us smarter by virtue of giving us access to more data faster than ever, it also threatens a type of intelligence that is measured by depth and thought rather than sheer speed. The habits of browsing, scanning, and reading in a non-linear fashion has undermined the capacity to immerse oneself in longer works of writing, such as books. Extending the logic to politics, public opinions may become less rational and more erratic, as individuals will lack a carefully developed understanding on which to base their opinions. Despite the overwhelming volume of information about politics online. This trend might explain the significant percentage of Americans who believe political stories that are untrue or based on misinformation, such as claim that President Obama is not a U.S. citizen. However, as we've seen in this chapter, some research indicate that most individuals use simple cues and shortcuts to process political information. If this is correct, scanning and skimming headlines might provide a reasonable way to be informed about politics without extensive time or effort. Cost to democracy. If political scientists are correct in their findings that many citizens base their opinion and votes on inadequate knowledge and over reliance on cues from political elites, this raises a critical question. If political knowledge is necessary for effective citizenship, how does a general lack of such knowledge affect the way we govern ourselves? Although understandable and perhaps inevitable, low levels of political knowledge and engagement weakens American democracy in two ways. First, those who lack political information cannot effectively defend their own political interests and can easily become losers in political struggles. The presence of large numbers of politically unattentive or ignorant individuals mean that political power can more easily be manipulated by political elites, the media, the wealthy, special interests. If public opinion is easily manipulated, this would not bode well for democracy, but other research has shown that individuals are quite stable and rational in their policy formation. For a closer look at the stability of public opinion on three issues, see Figure 5.4, notice that even when public opinion has shifted, as in the case of same-sex marriage, the shift has been relatively steady. We don't see a dramatic jump up and down. Second, if knowledge is power, then a lack of knowledge can contribute to growing political and economic inequality. When individuals are unaware of their interests or how to pursue them, it is virtually certain that political outcomes will not favor them. As discussed in the introduction, America has one of the largest gaps between the rich and the poor of any nation in the world. But rather than raise taxes over the past several decades, the United States has substantially reduced the rates of taxation levied on its wealthiest citizen. Political scientist Larry Bartels has shown that, surprisingly, most Americans favored the tax cuts, including millions of middle and lower middle class citizens who did not stand to benefit from the tax policies. The explanation for this odd state of affairs appeared to be a lack of political knowledge. Millions of individuals who were unlikely to derive benefits from President Bush's tax policy thought they would. The media and government mold opinion. Describe the major forces that shape public opinion. When individuals attempt to form opinions about particular political issues, events, or personalities, they seldom do so in isolation. Typically, they are confronted with, sometimes bombarded by, the efforts of the host of individuals and groups seeking to persuade them to adopt a particular point of view. During the 2012 presidential election, someone trying to decide what to think about Barack Obama or Mitt Romney could hardly avoid an avalanche of opinions expressed through the media, in meetings, or in conversation with friends. The marketplace of ideas is the interplay of opinions and views that occurs as competing forces attempt to persuade as many people as possible to accept a particular position on a particular issue. Given this constant exposure to the ideas of others, it is virtually impossible for most individuals to persist some modification of their own beliefs. Three forces that play important roles in shaping opinion in the marketplace are the government, private groups, and the news media. The government leads public opinion. All governments try to influence, manipulate, or manage their citizens' beliefs, but the extent to which public opinion is actually affected by governmental public relations can be limited. Often, governmental claims are disputed by the media, by interest group, and at times even by opposing forces within the government itself. This hasn't stopped modern presidents from focusing a great deal of attention on shaping public opinion to boost support for their policy agendas. Franklin Delano Roosevelt promoted his policy agenda directly to the American people through his famous fireside chat radio broadcast. The George W. Bush administration developed an extensive public relations program to bolster popular support for its policies, including its war against terrorism. These efforts include presidential speeches, media appearances by administration officials, numerous press conferences, and thousands of press releases presenting the administration's views. Using the runway of an aircraft carrier as his stage, a confident commander-in-chief, Bush, dressed in a flight suit, proclaimed the end of the Iraq War. His statement was premature by 8 years, but was effective at maintaining public support for the Iraq War. Like its predecessor, the Obama administration has sought to shape public opinion in the United States and abroad, relying on power of the president's oratorical skills to build support for his administration initiatives and domestic and foreign policies. But Obama's White House is unique in using social media to promote the president's policy agenda. Hourly posts on Facebook promotes Obama's policies and campaign and serve to personalize the president. Private groups also shape public opinions. Important political ideas that become prominent in political life are developed and spread not only by government officials but also by important economic and political groups searching for issues that will advance their causes. One, one especially notable example is the abortion issue, which has inflamed American politics over the past 40 years. The notion of a fetile right to life, whose proponents seek to outlaw abortion and overturn the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, was developed by conservative politicians who saw the issue of abortion as a mean of uniting Catholic and Protestant conservatives and linking both groups to the Republican Party, along with various rights to life groups. Catholic and evangelical Protestant religious leaders organized to denounce abortion from their church pulpit and increasingly from their television, radio, and internet pulpits, including the Christian Broadcasting Network. Religious leaders have also organized demonstrations, pickets, and disruption at abortion clinics throughout the nation. These efforts have helped win the enactment of stricter abortion laws in many states. The news media message impacts public opinion. The media are among the most powerful forces operating in the marketplace of ideas. As we shall see in Chapter 6, the mass media are not simply neutral messengers for ideas developed by others. Instead, they are very much opinion makers in their own right and have an enormous impact on popular attitude. For example, for the past 40 years since the publication of the Pentagon Papers by the New York Times, and the exposure of the Watergate scandal led by the Washington Post, the national news media have relentlessly investigated personnel and official wrongdoing on the part of politicians and public officials. The continual media presentation of corruption in government has undoubtedly contributed to the general attitude of cynicism and distrust that prevails in much of the general public, as discussed above. At the time, at the same time, the ways in which media coverage interprets or frames specific events can have a major impact on popular responses and opinions about these events. For example, the Bush administration went to great lengths to persuade the media to follow its lead in their coverage of America's response to terrorism in the months following the September 11, 2001 attacks. The media mostly went along, presenting the administration's military campaign in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as its domestic anti-terrorist efforts, in a positive light. Even supposedly liberal newspapers such as the New York Times, which had strongly opposed Bush in 2000 election, praised his leadership and published articles supportive of the president's bellicose rhetoric against the Iraqi regime prior to March 2003, when President Bush ordered the invasion of Iraq. Government policies also respond to public opinion. Studies generally suggest that elected officials pay attention to the preferences of the public. For example, political scientists Benjamin Page and Robert Shapiro has studied the relationship between changes in opinion towards various political issues and the policy outcomes that most closely correspond to the issues. The results show that shifts in public opinions on particular issues do in fact tend to lead to changes in public policies. One such example is in healthcare. In July 2009, Pew survey found out 65% of Americans favored a law requiring all Americans to have health insurance. The government aid for those unable to afford it. And government aid for those unable to afford it. The federal government adopted the Affordable Health Care Act for America in 2010, which required health insurance for all citizens. However, there is a reason to question whether prevailing public opinion causes politicians to make policies that reflect the general will, or whether government policies in fact cause changes in public opinion. The relationship between government policy and opinion may be dynamic, wherein policies responds to opinion, but opinion also shift based on new government policies. Studies of whether government policies can affect public opinions have found it to have an effect in various policy areas such as the environment, healthcare, welfare reform, and smoking bans. Today, same-sex marriage is one of the most prominent policy engagement. Opinion on morality and civil rights. Opinion polls show that support for same-sex marriages increasing. Might it be that state policies send a signal, either legitimizing it, recognizing same-sex marriage, in states recognizing same-sex marriage, or stigmatizing it in states that prohibit same-sex marriage? Some new research suggests that opinions favoring marriage right is increasing more quickly in states that have legalized same-sex marriage than in other states. This is an example where state policies may play an important role in changing public opinion. Of course, sometimes public opinion and policies do not align. At times, officials act on their own preferences if they believe it will benefit government or society. And studies have indeed shown that lawmakers typically do use their own judgment when making policy choices. The bailout of the banks in 2008, for example, was carried out despite polls showing that a majority of Americans opposed this policy. When elected officials pursue policies not aligned with centrist opinion, it is often because they view particular groups of the electorate as more important than others. And, inevitably, loyal voting blocs or interest groups that regularly contribute to a candidate may have their interests more closely represented than the general public. Measuring public opinion is crucial to understand what it is. Describe basic survey methods and other techniques researchers use to measure public opinion. Today, public officials make extensive use of public opinion polls to help them decide whether to run for office, what policies to support, how to vote on important legislation, and what types of appeals to make in their campaigns. All recent presidents and other major political figures have worked closely with polls and pollsters. In addition, major media outlets and other private organizations make extensive use of poll and polling. Public opinion surveys are accurate if done properly. It is not feasible to it is not feasible to interview the more than 300 million Americans residing in the United States on their opinion of who should be the next president or what should be done about important policy issues such as how to improve the economy and create jobs. Instead, posters take a sample of the population and use it to make inference, extrapolation, and educated guesses about the preferences of the population as a whole. For a political survey to be an accurate representation of the population, it must meet certain requirements, including an appropriate sample method, a sufficient sample size, and the avoidance of selection bias. Representative samples. The most representative sample is what statisticians call a sample random sample or probability sample, in which every individual in the population has an equal probability of being selected as a respondent. Since we don't have a complete list of all Americans, pollsters use census data, lists of households, and telephone numbers to create lists, drawing a sample from regions and then neighborhoods within regions. Just as in a simple random sample, everyone has an equal chance of being selected for the survey. Rolls of registered voters are often used in political surveys designed to predict the outcome of an election. Another method for drawing samples of the national population is a technique called random digit dialing of landline and cell phone numbers, but not business phones or an operative home telephone. In this method, respondents are selected at random from a list of 10-digit telephone numbers, which every effort made to avoid bias in the construction of the sample. A computer random number generate generator is used to produce a list of 10-digit telephone numbers. Given that 98% of Americans have telephones, cell phones, or landline, this technique usually results in a random national sample. This allows almost every citizen a chance of being included in the survey. Telephone surveys are fairly accurate, cost-effective, and flexible in the type of questions that can be asked. Websites such as realclearpolitics.com list the result of every political survey released each day. Every week, the opinion of Americans are measured regarding not just candidates and public policies, but also a vast array of products: toothpaste, entertainment, movie star, romance, and even college political science textbook. Sample size. A sample must be large enough to provide an accurate representation of the population. Surprisingly, though, the size of the population being measured doesn't matter, only the size of the sample. A survey of 1,000 people is just as effective for measuring the opinions of all Texans, a state with 26 million residents, as the opinion of all Americans with over 314 million residents. Flipping a coin shows how this works. After tossing a coin 10 times, the number of heads and tails may not be close to 5 and 5. After 100 tosses of the coin, though, the percentage of the heads should be close to 50%, and after 1,000 tosses, very close to 50%. In fact, after 1,000 tosses, there is a 95% chance that the number of heads will be somewhere between 46.9% and 53.1%. This 3.1% variation from 50% is called the sampling error, or margin of error, a polling error that arises based on the small size of the sample. It is the amount of error we can expect with a typical 1,000 person survey. Normally, samples of 1,000 people are considered sufficient for accurately measuring public opinions through the use of surveys. When the media refer to a scientific poll conducted by a highly respected polling firm, they actually mean a poll that has followed the steps just outlined, a poll based on a random, representative sample of the population that is sufficiently large and avoids selection bias. Survey design and questions. Wording. Even with reliable sampling